Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining me this morning for our workflow webinar. My name is Josh White. I am a business development executive with WorldView, and I will be showcasing the variety of workflows that WorldView can create to assist in creating greater efficiencies within your organization. So for today's agenda, I will make brief mention of other points of automation besides workflow that WorldView can offer to your organization. And then we'll walk through some basic functionality from a high-level perspective of what workflows can do for you, as well as various use cases for workflows, and also a demo of the solution itself, which consists of an AP approval workflow. As I said, we have various points of automation that we can offer here at WorldView, workflow being one of them and the most popular kind. But we also have a variety of others that can help, again, with efficiencies, including Outlook integration, which allows you to pull attachments directly out of your email and have those automatically routed through a workflow. And we've also got integration with mobile applications, as well as eForms, advanced reporting, and intelligent capture for AP. In regard to the demo I'm going to show you today, it will be on a very high level, and we'll showcase some of the basic workflow functionality which is listed here. We will see examples of each of these queues, the approval, exception, and reassignment queues, and I will also provide additional information on notifications, as well as modifications that can be made to data that is to be stored in Agility, and that can also be accomplished through the workflow. So again, just as a summary of basic workflow functionality, we've got a Visio here where the documents will flow in to the workflow and are validated as the first step, and from there are automatically routed either to be approved or potentially going to an exception queue, which then typically routes to the branch for approval. And then, of course, the AP clerk is involved for the most part in terms of making any adjustments and then sending back for approval before payment is made, and then ultimately the invoices themselves are stored within WorldView. So that being said, I am going to start with the demonstration at this point. And so what we have here is the basic user interface for our workflows. So as you see here, we're going to focus on expense invoices and inventory invoices, and we'll go ahead and start with inventory. So there are a few things we know about the inventory invoices. First of all, we know that not all inventory invoices may require approval. Some of our organizations that utilize these types of workflows, they will have those invoices automatically approved through the workflow if the three-way match is valid. So the three-way match, what that consists of is when this invoice comes into the workflow is going to reach out to Agility and look for the purchase order that is associated with this invoice. And if that amount on the purchase order is matching with the amount on the invoice, it's going to be approved automatically. Now, some organizations, they also like to incorporate a variance or a tolerance. So if there's not an exact match between the invoice and PO, if it's within a variance of, let's say, $1 either way, they have chosen to go ahead and still auto-approve that invoice. So the other piece of the three-way match is the receiving document. So some organizations, even if the inventory invoice and the purchase order match in terms of the amount, they also want to be sure that that receiving document is in Agility, obviously indicating that the order has been received, and then the invoices are then pushed through for payment. So the first step of the workflow is making sure that the invoice that's coming in is not a duplicate. Once the workflow checks that, then it routes based on the rules and logic that are required by your organization. But what we see here is that we have a buyer approval queue. Now again, from a high-level perspective, we're going to approach this demonstration as if we've got an auto-approval step within the workflow, and that these invoices here within the buyer approval queue are needing to be reviewed by me as the buyer for some reason. So what we can do is we'll go ahead and pull up one of our invoices here, and it looks like this one is from Milliken Millwork. So the way that these invoices are routed typically is based off of the supplier record within Agility. So if a buyer is specifically assigned to this vendor and it's not auto-approved, then these invoices will automatically route to that buyer's queue, just as they have here today in my queue. Now that's, again, typically based off of the supplier record in Agility, but we are also able to pull that information off of the purchase order or other documents, again, all based on your requirements within the organization. So what we can do here is look at this invoice, inspect it, and see if there's any adjustments that need to be made. But what we've got right up at the top on the left side is our work folder for this invoice. And what that includes is the supporting documents that I just mentioned as part of the three-way match. So if necessary, we can review the purchase order that's associated with this invoice as well as the receiving document as well. Of course, at that point, if everything looks kosher and for some reason this was just routed to us by mistake, we as the buyer can simply approve the invoice by clicking the button here down in the lower left-hand corner. So what it would do at that point is go ahead and it would move on through the workflow now that it's been approved. And what we see is that it is no longer in my queue here. And so then it routes through the workflow and is then sent to Agility, and a voucher number is created and placed on the invoice itself, and then it exits the workflow. So let's go ahead and pick up another invoice here that I need to review. And we'll go through a couple of different options here that you have as the buyer. So if we're looking down here at invoice details, this is basically like an ad hoc task that allows me as the buyer to update data that may be correct on the invoice. So if I go ahead and click on that, what we see here is we've got a few fields that pop up regarding the due date, the discount amount, and the discount date that I believe should apply to this invoice. So if I believe that there should be a discount amount of $50 based on maybe a discussion I've had with somebody at Reeb Millwork, and that's not reflected on the invoice, what I can do is enter that here within the invoice details and hit submit. So when I hit submit, it creates a note, and it has various information that we see here, including the discount amount that I entered. And if I confirm that that information is correct, I can hit OK. And what takes place at that point is a note is then added to the invoice moving forward. So no matter where this invoice is routed through the workflow, whoever else is going to be looking at it, they will be able to see that there's a note on this invoice that they need to review. And that's reflected by this little icon up here in the corner. So I can go ahead and minimize the note. And then when I send it on, the AP clerk typically will know that, hey, there should be a discount amount, so I need to make sure that this invoice is adjusted. So what I can do at that point is mark it as an exception, our other option down here on the bottom left. So when I mark it as an exception, what I'll want to do is make a note for the next individual who's going to handle it. So whoever's assigned to the exception queue will then receive this invoice and make the proper adjustments. So here I'll note that should be a discount of $50. And then once I hit OK, at that point it's automatically going to route to whoever is in charge of the exceptions queue. So as you see, that invoice has also left our queue as well. The important thing to note, and I want to go back and show you this in terms of the invoice details that we edited, This is something that I'll discuss a little bit later, but in terms of these fields themselves, a recent development that we've been able to begin implementing within the workflows is the ability to export this data at the end of the workflow directly into Agility. And what that does is saves a lot of manual work, because in a lot of organizations today, folks are entering data from invoices into Agility and then scanning them in and having to index those documents by adding keywords before they're stored in WorldView. So this process with the export of this data into Agility wipes out that first step of having to enter anything into Agility. So all of the information is automatically applied within the Agility platform, and we'll discuss that a little bit more later. But that is the purpose of these fields here, is that if I choose to modify the due date or override the discount amount or discount date, that information is saved on the document then as keyword information, which is then passed to Agility. So very cool step in the process to help further automate the approval of the invoices. So those are just a few examples of the inventory invoices. So what we'll do is jump over to the expense invoices now, because there's a little bit more detail that these involve, again, based on the expectations within your organization. So again, I'm going to play the role of branch manager in this case, and I've got 4 invoices within my queue that I need to look at. So I'm going to select the one for tappet buttons, and this will go, these invoices will travel very similar to the inventory invoices. So first, it's going to check Agility to make sure there's no duplicate invoice from this vendor. And again, it's going to route to myself as the branch manager, again, based on that supplier record within Agility. So a lot of similar steps. Excuse me. So the biggest piece that I want to cover as part of the expense invoices is the GL coding. So what we've got here, what we've got the ability to do is pull up a coding form. And that's basically an e-form that is provided with each expense invoice as part of our review. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up that coding form side by side with my invoice here that I need to review, because I want to see what GL code or codes may be assigned to this invoice. So what we see here is that there's a default GL code of 1001 assets, and then the entire amount of the invoice is calculated here as well. So just like the branch manager, just like the invoices are assigned based on who the manager is within the supplier record, it works the same for a GL code. So if there's a default GL code for specific vendors, the workflow will apply that to the invoice automatically, like we have here in this example. Now let's say that we get this, we're looking at the GL coding, and something just isn't correct, or we've got a unique situation where we need to make modifications. That is easy enough to do. We can create a drop-down menu with a list of every GL code that you have in your organization, and you can scroll down through and pick one of these, and then go ahead and submit the GL coding form associated with the invoice with the changes you made. Now you also have the option here to split the amount on this invoice across multiple GL codes if necessary. So let's say we've got a couple here that we need to provide amounts to, and we're going to say that $400 of this invoice needs to go to the receivables GL code. And so we need to take that $400 out of the amount that is going to the inventories. And so basically, it will then calculate down here the line item total, which of course will need to match what's on the invoice, and it will not allow you to submit unless there is a match. So we've got this corrected at this point, and again, based on your logic and rules, myself as the branch manager can make these modifications, or if I want someone else within the AP department to make those changes, I've always got the option to route it as an exception with a note on it saying that GL codes need to be taken care of, or like we did here, we can take care of it ourselves. So I'll hit submit because we made the appropriate changes and it lets me know that it's been saved. The invoice does still stay in my queue though. So basically we made the changes. We're able to, at this point, go ahead and approve that invoice. Apologize. There we go. And I am confirming that I do want to approve the invoice. So that will move on and route out of the workflow. So again, just as with the inventory invoices, you have the ability, and it's not on here because I wanted to demonstrate other pieces for the expense invoices, but you do have the ability to override fields for data that would be entered into Agility, again, such as the due date, discount amount, discount date. That will be an option as part of the expense invoices as well, where everything can be modified before entry into Agility. So one more feature, and again, I'm showing it to you here on the expense invoice workflow, but it can also be part of the inventory invoice workflow, is the ability to reassign an invoice to a specific buyer. So let's say for some reason I received this invoice from Phone Shack by mistake, and it's actually supposed to go to Brian Stevens. All I have to do is select him from a drop-down menu and hit submit, and we see that that invoice has now disappeared from my queue. So what we can do as a branch manager, though, is we can also have visibility to see other users' documents and, of course, confirm that a document was moved to another user, reassigned to another user as expected. So all I have to do at this point is just click on another document, right-click and select See Other Users' Documents. I want to see Brian Stevens to confirm that the one I sent to him is there. And this invoice is now in his queue for approval. The nice thing about this workflow is it allows visibility to those who may want to have oversight. So they would be able to look into users' queues, make sure that invoices are being approved and moved along appropriately and in a timely manner. And as part of that, what actually makes that visibility a little bit simpler is the ability to set up notifications as part of the workflow. So we can really customize everything according to your needs. So even in the case that myself as a branch manager, as soon as an invoice hits my queue, we could have a notification set up where it sends me an email and lets me know you have one new invoice in your queue for review. Please review at your convenience, something like that, and also would include a link within that email that would allow me access to workflow. So that's just an example of a notification. Let's say as the user, I've got invoices that have been sitting in my queue for multiple days that haven't been moved. My boss, we could set up notifications where my boss would receive an email, let's say after 48 hours, if an invoice hasn't moved. My boss would receive an email saying invoice number 12345 is currently in Josh's queue and no action has been taken for 48 hours. So then if they need to, they can reach out to me and ask what's going on, if it's still in review, something to that nature. So really notifications can play a key role within the workflow. And again, we can set those up customized to suit whatever needs your organization has. So as I noted, I wanted to discuss a little bit more about the functionality of the export of data from the workflow to Agility. So this is a huge step for us here that we're able to implement for folks, and it definitely saves a lot of time. So utilizing the e-commerce module, basically what takes place is, again, based off the supplier record, if there's default pay terms that are assigned, the invoices that are going through the workflow are going to be assigned those default pay terms. So all of this information that's saved as keywords on the invoice, as well as any fields that are overridden as part of the workflow. All of that data is then saved in an XML file, and there's a file created for each invoice. And basically, let's say on a nightly basis, all of those XML files are then uploaded to Agility through the e-commerce module, and all of that data within that XML file is then assigned appropriately based on the invoice. So there is no modification of data that needs to take place within Agility. It really is all done through the workflow and prevents any further changes that need to be made. And again, we can customize that piece as well, but that is certainly a huge step that we like to show folks. And then once that data is exported to Agility, at that point the invoice itself exits the workflow and then is sent to WorldView for storage. And that completes the workflow process at that point. So the last thing that I want to mention today is the ability for several use cases of workflows. Now, the ones that I showcased for you here today are the most common ones that we have developed and built for our partners. But there are a variety of workflows that we have also created over time, and those are just a sample of those are listed here. Now, you see a couple that are highlighted in red. I have a couple examples just to kind of explain other workflows that we can create. We actually have a partner right now that is utilizing what we call supplier document distribution workflow, and that, I guess, is just a fancy way to say we're sending invoices and an associated signed delivery ticket to our partner's customer. So this came about because the customer, Home Depot, is one of their largest, our partner, one of their largest customers is Home Depot. And they were having someone from Home Depot's AP department call dozens of times, potentially in one day, saying, hey, I need a copy of this signed delivery ticket for this invoice. And so over time, they were starting to get frustrated with that. You know, having to stop and retrieve all of those was taking way too much time. And so they came to us and asked us what we could help them with. So basically, in short order, we were able to develop a workflow that allowed us to distribute the invoice and the associated signed delivery ticket directly to Home Depot through automatic email to their AP department. The other example here that we've got highlighted is the new account e-form and processing workflow. And this boils down to basically looking at signing up new customers to make purchases. And basically what one of our partners does today is their salespeople are out in the field and they have their mobile devices with them, typically like a tablet. And what they can do through that tablet is utilize an e-form, fill that out with the new customer's information, and then submit it through a workflow. It's routed back to the office. All of that information is then entered into Agility, so it's in order nearly immediately. There's no waiting on forms to be, like paper forms to be approved and having to wait before you put an order in. So that's just another example of workflow that we have put in place for other individuals. The last point that I'd like to bring up here is just really about the benefit of workflow. So outside of what we've already noted in terms of the time savings and the visibility and the prevention of manual entry into Agility, what this really does is it allows organizations to control the process. So we know that there's internal processes that organizations have that may not be specifically defined. And so part of adding workflow, one of those intangible benefits, is it really defines what the necessary and value-added steps are within your critical business processes, and then really narrows down who actually needs to be involved in that process. For example, we're working on a workflow for a partner of ours today, and they have nearly 10 people who touch an invoice at any given time within the approval process. And with putting a workflow in place, we're able to pare that down to just a few individuals, so then those other folks who had previously been involved can be reassigned to handle more important duties within the office instead of pushing paper invoices around. So again, we're really looking at the value-added steps of your processes and making sure that those steps are taking place as quickly and accurately as possible. So with that being said, again, I appreciate you taking the time to join our webinar today. I certainly hope this information has been of benefit to you. I do have my contact information up here on the screen. If you have any questions or would like to learn more details about specific workflows that can be created for your organization, please feel free to reach out to me at any time, either by phone or email. But certainly also reach out to your account manager as well if you'd like to, and we can certainly schedule some more time to speak further about workflow and other automation. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.